At their reunion, so my family bought their vacation home. The text came on a Tuesday evening. I was curled up on our apartment sofa, finalizing the time-off request for the big Reynolds family reunion. Tom and I had been planning for months. I'd even ordered custom-matching t-shirts with Reynolds Reunion 2025 embroidered across the front. That's when my phone lit up with a message from my mother-in-law, Diane. "Elena, dear, we need to discuss the reunion arrangements. The family has decided it would be best if you sit this one out. Family only this year. Tom can still come, of course." I stared at those words until they blurred. Family only? I'd been married to Tom for 3 years. How was I not family? My hands trembled as I read the message again, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. After 3 years of marriage, countless dinners where I'd smiled through thinly veiled criticism, and endless efforts to fit into the Reynolds world, I was being explicitly uninvited from their precious lakeside reunion. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Part 1. The Betrayal. I met Thomas Reynolds 4 years ago at a charity gala in Chicago. I was there representing my marketing firm. He was attending with his parents' country club friends. Tom stood out immediately, not just because he was handsome in his tailored suit, but because he seemed as uncomfortable with the pretentiousness as I was. We bonded over sneaking extra appetizers and making up backstories for the guests who looked most likely to own yachts they couldn't sail themselves. Within a year, we were engaged. That's when I first visited Cedar Pines Cottage, the Reynolds family vacation home on Lake Michigan. It was beautiful, a sprawling lakefront property with weathered cedar shingles, a massive stone fireplace, and windows that captured every shade of blue the lake had to offer. The home had been in their family for 2 generations, passed down from Richard's parents who had purchased it in the 1970s. "This is where we've had every family reunion since before I was born," Tom had told me, his eyes bright with nostalgia. 50 years this summer. It's sacred ground for the Reynolds clan. I remember thinking how wonderful it must be to have a place that held so many memories. My own family, my parents and brother, were warm and loving, but we'd never had the luxury of a vacation home. My parents, Sophia and Miguel, had immigrated from Mexico before I was born, building their restaurant business from scratch. Our family gatherings happened around the dinner table of their suburban home, loud and loving and smelling of my mother's cooking. The Reynolds family was different. Diane was always perfectly put together, her comments wrapped in politeness, but sharp enough to cut. Richard was distant, more interested in business connections than personal ones. Tom's siblings, Megan and James, were friendly enough but seemed to share some secret language I couldn't access. Still, I tried. For 3 years, I attended every Reynolds family event with a smile. I learned to play bridge because Diane loved it. I memorized Richard's favorite wines. I listened to Megan drone on about her law firm's latest victories, and I asked James about his medical practice even when his responses made me feel intellectually inferior. The annual reunion at Cedar Pines was the centerpiece of their family calendar, a week-long celebration of the Reynolds legacy. Tom had warned me the first year we dated that it was family only, which I'd accepted. After we married, I attended my first reunion, feeling like I'd finally crossed some invisible threshold into belonging. It hadn't gone well. I'd used the wrong fork at dinner, laughed too loudly at Richard's joke, and committed the cardinal sin of suggesting we try a new recipe rather than Diane's traditional reunion menu. But I thought we'd moved past that. I thought after 3 years I was family too. Yet here I was, staring at Diane's message, the sting of rejection burning in my chest. Tom found me still on the couch an hour later, my eyes red from crying. "Elena, what's wrong?" He dropped his bag by the door, rushing to my side. Wordlessly, I handed him my phone. I watched his expression shift from concern to confusion to anger as he read his mother's message. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, already dialing Diane's number. He put the phone on speaker. "Mom, what is this about Elena not coming to the reunion? She's my wife." Diane's voice was calm, practiced. "Thomas, darling, we simply thought this year we should keep it intimate. The cottage isn't getting any bigger, and with James bringing his new girlfriend and Megan's children getting older—" "Stop," Tom interrupted. "Elena is my family. If she's not welcome, I'm not coming either." There was a pause before Diane responded, her voice taking on that wounded tone I'd come to recognize as manipulation. "Don't be dramatic, Thomas. Of course we want you there. It's the 50th anniversary. Your grandfather would be so disappointed if you missed it." "Then I guess he'd be disappointed," Tom said firmly. "Elena and I are a package deal." Another pause, longer this time. "Let me talk to your father and get back to you." 2 hours later, the follow-up call came. I sat beside Tom as Richard's gruff voice filled our living room through the speakerphone. "Tom, your mother tells me you're making a fuss about the reunion arrangements." Tom's jaw tightened. "I'm not making a fuss, Dad. I'm standing by my wife." "Look, son." Richard's voice took on that patronizing tone I'd heard him use in business. Discussions. "There's nothing personal here. We've simply outgrown the space. Someone has to stay home, and Elena is the newest addition. She'll understand." "But James is bringing his new girlfriend," I said before I could stop myself. "We've been married for 3 years." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's different," Richard finally said. "Margot comes from the Hendersons. They're old family friends." And there it was, the truth laid bare. I wasn't from the right family. I didn't have the right background. Despite my education, my career success, my devotion to their son, I would always be the outsider. Tom's voice was cold when he responded. "Thanks for clearing that up, Dad. Elena and I won't be attending." After he hung up, we sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling between us. Tom reached for my hand, his voice soft but determined. "I'm sorry, Elena. I knew they could be elitist, but I never thought." He trailed off, shaking his head. "We'll do something else that weekend, just us." I squeezed his hand, fighting back tears. "It's not about the weekend, Tom. It's about them never seeing me as good enough." The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee, my mind racing. As I scrolled through my emails trying to distract myself, a notification from a real estate app caught my eye. Properties I might be interested in, based on my search history. I hadn't been searching for property. But there, at the top of the list, was a familiar cedar-shingled house on the shores of Lake Michigan, Cedar Pines Cottage, listed for sale, quietly, without any fanfare. The Reynolds' precious family vacation home was on the market. I nearly dropped my phone. Why would they sell? And why hadn't Tom mentioned anything? Unless he didn't know. As the pieces fell into place, a cold realization washed over me. The reunion wasn't about space constraints or family traditions. It was about selling the cottage without having to explain why. And they didn't want me there because they knew. I'd noticed things. Papers being signed, hushed conversations, final photographs being taken. I didn't say anything to Tom immediately. Instead, I called my father. "Papa, I need your real estate expertise," I said when he answered. I explained the situation, my voice trembling with hurt and anger. My father listened quietly. Miguel Martinez had built his life on seeing opportunities where others saw nothing. After establishing the family restaurant with my mother, he'd gradually moved into real estate investments, turning his immigrant's dream into a thriving portfolio. "Mi hija," he said when I finished, using the endearment from my childhood. "Send me the listing." 2 days passed. I went through the motions at work, came home to our apartment, and pretended everything was normal. Tom had called his siblings, who both feigned ignorance about my exclusion from the reunion. "Mom and Dad make the rules," James had said dismissively. Megan had been slightly more sympathetic, but ultimately unhelpful. "You know how they are about traditions." On Friday evening, my parents and brother showed up at our apartment unannounced, carrying takeout from their restaurant and serious expressions. "We need to talk," my mother said, embracing me tightly before turning to Tom with a warm but determined smile. "Both of you." Over my mother's famous chile rellenos, my father laid out what he'd discovered. Cedar Pines Cottage was indeed for sale, listed quietly with a realtor who specialized in high-end, discreet transactions. The Reynolds were asking well below market value, suggesting they needed to sell quickly. "They're in financial trouble," my father explained. "Richard's investment firm has been struggling. From what my contacts tell me, they're liquidating assets to cover losses." Tom looked stunned. "That's impossible. Dad would have said something." My brother Carlos raised an eyebrow. "Would he? From what Elena tells us, your father's pride is bigger than his common sense." Tom didn't argue. He knew it was true. "There's more," my father continued. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The property isn't just undervalued. It's a steal. That location, that history, it's worth twice what they're asking. "Why are you telling us this?" I asked, though I was beginning to understand the gleam in my father's eye. My mother reached across the table to take my hand. "Because we're going to buy it." The room went silent. Tom's jaw literally dropped. "What?" we both said simultaneously. My father smiled, the same smile I'd seen when he'd signed the papers on his first investment property. "The Martinez family is going to buy Cedar Pines Cottage." "Papa, no," I shook my head. That's too much." "It's business," he replied simply. "A good investment, and—" He exchanged glances with my mother. "It's also personal. No one treats my daughter like she doesn't belong." Tom looked torn between shock and something like admiration. "Mr. Martinez, Miguel, I don't know what to say. That house has been in my family for— And now it will be in ours," my mother interrupted gently. "Sometimes, mijo, the universe has a way of balancing things." The plan was set in motion. My father would make an offer through a business entity, keeping our family name out of it until the deal was done. We wouldn't tell anyone. Not Diane, not Richard, not the siblings. Let them have their family-only reunion. They wouldn't know until after Labor Day weekend that their precious Cedar Pines cottage had found new owners. As my family left that night, my brother pulled me aside. "Stand tall, Hermana," he whispered. "You deserve to belong." I couldn't sleep that night, my mind racing with the audacity of what we were planning. Part of me felt vindicated, imagining the looks on their faces when they discovered the truth. But another part felt sad, recognizing that this would drive an irreparable wedge between Tom and his family. When I finally whispered my concerns to Tom in the darkness of our bedroom, he pulled me close. "Elena, I've watched you bend over backwards for 3 years trying to fit into their world. I've seen you swallow their subtle insults, accommodate their traditions, and still show up with a smile. But this message, explicitly excluding you, that's where I draw the line." He kissed my forehead. "If they can't accept my wife, they don't accept me. And honestly, if they've been hiding financial problems instead of just talking to me like an adult, that tells me everything I need to know about how they view our relationship." "Are you sure?" I asked, still uncertain. "This is your family history we're talking about." Tom was quiet for a moment. "My family history isn't in a building, Elena. It's in the memories. And lately, those memories have been tainted by watching how they treat you." He squeezed my hand. "Besides, I kind of love that the Martinez family doesn't just talk about being inclusive. They put their money where their mouth is. The next morning, my father called. His offer had been submitted, and given that it was significantly over, asking price despite the already good value, he expected it would be accepted quickly. We just had to wait and say nothing. Meanwhile, the texts from Diane continued, each one more manipulative than the last. Thomas, we've reconsidered. Elena can come for the weekend portion, just not the full week. Your father is very upset by your reaction. You know his heart condition can't handle stress. This may be our last reunion at Cedar Pines. Don't. You want to be part of that memory. That last one almost made me laugh out loud. If only she knew how true her words were. Tom stopped responding after a while, which only increased the frequency of Diane's messages. Finally, a week before the reunion, she called while Tom was at work. Elena, she said when I answered, her voice sugar-sweet. I hope you can help. Me reason with Thomas. This stubbornness isn't like him. I took a deep breath, remembering all the times I'd swallowed my pride for the sake of peace. Not this time. Actually, Diane, this is exactly like Tom. He's loyal and he values respect. Two qualities I'd think his mother would appreciate. Don't take that tone with me, she snapped, the sweetness evaporating. I've been nothing but welcoming to you, despite your differences from our family. Differences? I repeated. You mean my ethnicity? My middle-class background? Please, Diane, be specific about what makes me unworthy of your precious reunion. She gasped as if I'd slapped her. That's not what I meant. We just have traditions, ways of doing things, and I've respected all of them, I cut in. I've learned your recipes, played your games, listened to your stories. But it's never enough, is it? Because no matter what I do, I'll never be a Henderson or a Whitfield or whatever other old family name you respect. The silence on the other end told me I'd hit the mark. Tell Tom whatever you want about this conversation, I continued, finding strength in finally speaking my truth. But know this. You didn't just reject me with that message. You rejected us. And some things can't be undone. I hung up, my heart pounding but my spirit lighter than it had been in days. That evening, as Tom and I were discussing our alternative plans for the reunion weekend, my father called with news. The offer had been accepted. Cedar Pines Cottage would officially belong to Martinez Holdings after closing, which was expedited at the seller's request and scheduled for, ironically, the day after the reunion weekend. Tom was quiet after the call. I worried he might be having regrets, but when he finally spoke, his voice was resolved. They're really selling without telling any of us, he said, shaking his head. 50 years of family history, and they couldn't even have a conversation about it. Are you okay? I asked gently. He looked at me, his eyes clear. No, but I will be. And honestly, if your family is going to own Cedar Pines, at least I know it will be filled with love and laughter again. That's more than I can say for what it's become with my parents. As the reunion weekend approached, Diane's messages grew desperate, then cold, then resigned. The final text came the day before they were all set to arrive at the cottage. We're disappointed in your choice, Thomas. Your grandfather would be too. Tom didn't respond, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. I wrapped my arms around him, wishing I could shield him from the pain his own family was causing. What do you want to do this weekend instead? I asked, trying to distract him. He thought for a moment, then smiled slowly. Actually, I have an idea. Let's go to Pine Ridge. What? I pulled back to look at him. You want to go to the town where they're having the reunion? Not to crash it, he clarified, but to say goodbye, in my own way. To walk along the lake one more time, visit the ice cream shop I loved as a kid, make some final memories before it changes hands. It was risky. We might run into each other. But somehow, I understood his need for closure. So that Friday afternoon, we packed overnight bags and made the 3-hour drive to Pine Ridge, booking a room at a small inn on the opposite side of the lake from Cedar Pines. The evening was warm, the late summer sun lingering on the horizon as we walked along the public beach. Tom was quiet, occasionally pointing out landmarks from his childhood. The dock where he'd learned to fish with his grandfather, the ice cream shop that still had the same striped awning, the tree where he'd carved his initials as a teenager. "Will you miss it?" I asked softly as we sat on a bench overlooking the water. Tom considered the question. Parts of it, the memories of what it was, definitely. But the reality of what it became? He shook his head. That place stopped feeling like home a long time ago. We ate dinner at a local restaurant, purposely avoiding the spots favored by the Reynolds family. But as we were leaving, fate intervened. James, Tom's brother, was entering with his girlfriend Margot as we were heading out. The moment froze in awkward suspension. James looked genuinely shocked to see us, while Margot, whom I'd never met, smiled with uncertain politeness. "Tom? Elena?" James recovered first. "What are you doing here? Mom said you weren't coming." "We're not," Tom replied evenly. "We're staying at the Lakeside Inn. Just wanted one last weekend in Pine Ridge." James's brow furrowed. "One last weekend? What are you talking about?" Tom and I exchanged glances. He hadn't planned to confront his family this way, but now that we were here, the truth hovered between us. "I think you'd better ask Mom and Dad about that," Tom said finally. "Enjoy your dinner." He took my hand and led me past them, but James caught his arm. "Wait, what's going on? Are you selling your condo or something?" Tom turned back, his expression hardening. "No, James. But someone's selling something. Again, ask Mom and Dad." We left James standing there confused, Margot whispering questions beside him. The ride back to our inn was tense. Tom's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "He doesn't know," I said quietly. "None of them do." "That's my point," Tom replied. "We're supposed to be family, but they're selling our family home without even telling us. And then they have the nerve to exclude you because you're not family enough?" He hit the steering wheel with his palm. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. Back at the inn, we tried to salvage the evening, but the encounter with James had cast a shadow over our attempt at a peaceful goodbye. Tom tossed and turned all night, and I lay beside him, wondering if we'd made a mistake by coming here. The next morning, we decided to leave early, to avoid any more uncomfortable run-ins. But as we were loading the car, a text came through. On Tom's phone. "James, Dad just told us. They're selling Cedar Pines." When were they going to tell us? After the last reunion? Tom stared at the message, then showed it to me. "What do you want to do?" I asked. He thought for a moment, then typed a response. "Tom, exactly. But they didn't even have the courage to tell me directly. I found out because Elena saw the listing." The reply came quickly. "James, are you serious? When?" "Tom, days ago. That's why we came this weekend, to say goodbye." There was a long pause before the next message arrived. "James, Megan and I are at the cottage now. Come over. They need to face all of us." I watched Tom's face, seeing the conflict there. "You don't have to go," I said. "We can just drive home." He shook his head. "No, I need to do this. But Elena," he took my hands in his, "I don't want you to have to face their coldness again." "I'll be right beside you," I said firmly. "We're a team, remember?" The drive to Cedar Pines took less than 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. As we pulled into the familiar gravel driveway, I saw several cars already parked. James's, sleek BMW, Megan's family SUV, and Richard and Diane's Mercedes. Tom parked behind them and turned off the engine, taking a deep breath. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded, reaching for my hand as we walked up the path to the front door. We didn't. Need to knock. The door swung open before we reached it. Megan stood there, her expression a mix of anger and relief. "Thank God you're here," she said, pulling Tom into a quick hug before stepping back to let us in. "It's a complete mess." The living room looked like a battlefield. Richard stood by the fireplace, his face flushed. Diane sat rigidly on the sofa while James paced by the windows that overlooked the lake. Margot was nowhere to be seen, probably sent away for this family matter. "Well," Richard said when he saw us, "I suppose we should thank you for blowing up our weekend, Thomas." Tom's jaw tightened. "I blew up the weekend? You were going to sell our family home without telling any of us, and somehow I'm the problem?" "We were going to announce it this weekend," Diane cut in, her voice brittle, "once everyone was together." "Except Elena," I said quietly. All eyes turned to me. Diane's expression hardened. "This is a family matter," she said dismissively. "Exactly," Tom replied. "And Elena is my family." He looked around at his siblings. "Did they tell you why they're selling? The real reason?" Megan frowned. "Dad said it was time to downsize, that maintaining the cottage was becoming too much." Tom laughed without humor. "Try again, Dad. Tell them the truth." Richard's face darkened. "That's enough, Thomas. You have no right." "No right?" Tom's voice rose. "This cottage has been presented to us our entire lives as our inheritance, our legacy. You've used it to control us, to force us into your idea of family. And now you're secretly selling it because you made bad investments, and you don't even have the decency to be honest about it." The silence that followed was deafening. James stopped pacing. Megan's mouth fell open. "Is that true?" she finally asked. "Are you in financial trouble?" Richard and Diane exchanged glances. Diane looked away first, her perfect posture finally faltering. "Your father's firm has faced some setbacks," she admitted reluctantly. "We need to liquidate certain assets." "Setbacks?" Richard exploded. "The firm is on the brink of collapse. Everything's mortgaged to the hilt. This cottage is the only thing we own free and clear, and if we don't sell it, we'll lose everything." The raw admission hung in the air. I'd never seen Richard so undone, his carefully cultivated image of success crumbling before our eyes. "Why didn't you tell us?" James asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "We could have helped." Richard shook his head. "It's too far. Gone for that." He looked at Tom, his expression a mix of anger and shame. "How did you find out?" Before Tom could answer, I spoke up. "I saw the listing online. It wasn't hard to figure out what was happening, especially when you specifically uninvited me from the reunion. You were planning to have your last hurrah, here without me, then announce the sale after it was too late for anyone to object." Diane stood up, her composure returning. "You make it sound so calculated. We were trying to protect the family from unnecessary pain." "By excluding me?" I challenged. "How does that protect anyone?" "You wouldn't understand," she snapped. "This place represents generations of Reynolds history. We wanted one last perfect reunion before selling it to strangers?" Tom interrupted. "Because that's what's happening. You found a buyer, didn't you?" Richard nodded reluctantly. "The offer came in last week. Well over asking price. We signed the papers on Tuesday." Tom glanced at me, a silent question in his eyes. I gave him a slight nod. "Did they tell you who the buyer is?" he asked his siblings. Megan shook her head. "Does it matter? Once it's gone, it's gone." "It matters," Tom said firmly, "because the buyer isn't a stranger." He took a deep breath. "It's Elena's family." The room went completely still. 5 pairs of eyes stared at us in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" Richard finally managed. "Martinez Holdings," I said, watching recognition dawn on his face. "My father's company." Diane sank back onto the sofa. That's not possible," It's not. Only possible it's done, Tom replied. When we discovered you were selling the cottage, and that you'd excluded Elena from the reunion because of her background, my father-in-law decided to make an investment. Cancel it, Richard demanded, his face flushing deeper. Call him right now and cancel it. We can't, I said calmly. The papers are drawn up. And more importantly, we wouldn't if we could. My father made a legitimate business offer that you accepted. This is revenge, Diane whispered, her eyes narrowing. Because we asked you to skip one reunion. No, Diane, I corrected her. This is consequence. You made it clear that I would never be family to you, no matter how hard I tried. So now my family, the people who have always accepted Tom without question, will own the symbol of your exclusivity. Megan had been watching this exchange silently, but now she turned to her parents. Let me get this straight. You exclude Elena from the reunion because she's not family enough, but you're perfectly happy to sell our family home to her father? Do you not see the hypocrisy there? We didn't know it was her father, Richard exploded. Would it have mattered? James asked quietly. You needed the money. Richard had no answer for that. So what happens now? Megan asked, looking between Tom and me. Your family buys our cottage and then what? You kick us out forever? Turn it into something else? Tom shook his head. That was never the plan. I stepped forward, knowing it was time to extend the olive branch I'd come prepared to offer. My family didn't buy Cedar Pines out of spite. They bought it as an investment, yes, but also as a statement about what family really means. And what's that? Diane asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. That family isn't about bloodlines or traditions or social standing. It's about acceptance, inclusion, love without conditions. I took a breath. The cottage will still host reunions, but there'll be Reynolds-Martinez reunions, everyone welcome, no exclusions. The silence that followed felt different this time, less hostile, more contemplative. James was the first to laugh, a short, surprised sound. You know what? I actually like that idea. You can't be serious, Diane protested. I am, James replied. Look at us, Mom. We're falling apart as a family. The one thing that was supposed to bring us together, this cottage, has become just another thing to fight over. Maybe it's time for a change. Megan nodded slowly. Elena has never been anything but kind to this family, even when we didn't deserve it. If her family is willing to keep this place in the family, our extended family, I think that's more than generous. The look Diane gave her children could have frozen the lake. So you're all taking her side now? There shouldn't. Besides, Mom, Tom said wearily, that's the whole point. Elena and I are married. Her family is my family. That's how it works. Richard had been uncharacteristically quiet, staring out the window at the lake. Now he turned, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. We don't have a choice, he said, his voice flat. We need the money. The sale goes through. That's not quite true, I countered. We do have choices about what happens after the sale. My father's offer stands. The cottage remains a place for both families to gather. But there's a condition. Of course there is, Diane muttered. I ignored her. The condition is respect. Mutual respect. I've spent 3 years trying to earn yours, Diane. Now it's your turn to earn mine. Tom squeezed my hand, pride evident in his expression. For the first time since we'd entered Cedar Pines that day, I felt not like an intruder, but like someone standing firmly in her own power. And if we refuse? Richard asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then you'll be the ones missing the reunions, Tom said simply. The week that followed was tense. Tom and I returned to Chicago after the confrontation, leaving his family to process everything that had happened. The closing was scheduled for Tuesday, and though Richard had threatened to find ways to block the sale, he had no legal grounds to do so. The contract was binding. Monday night, the eve of the closing, my parents and brother came over for dinner. They were flying to Michigan the next morning to sign the papers in person, something my father insisted on doing rather than sending a proxy. "How does it feel, knowing you're about to own the Reynolds family cottage?" Carlos asked me as we sat around the table. I considered the question. "Complicated," I admitted. "Part of me feels vindicated, but another part just feels sad that it came to this." My mother reached over to squeeze my hand. "Mija, sometimes people need to lose something to understand its value. Maybe this is that moment for Tom's family. Or maybe they'll just hate us more," I said, voicing the fear I'd been carrying. My father shook his head. "Then that is their loss. But we do not buy this house to create more division. We buy it to build bridges, even if they are not ready to cross them yet." Tom, who had been listening quietly, raised his glass. "To building bridges," he said, "and to family, the kind you're born into and the kind you choose." We all clinked glasses, and I felt a surge of gratitude for these people who had stood by me unflinchingly. The next day, as my parents signed the papers officially transferring ownership of Cedar Pines Cottage to Martinez Holdings, Tom and I received an unexpected text from Megan. "Mom and Dad are a mess. Can we talk? Just us." Tom showed me the message. "What do you think?" "I think we should hear what she has to say," I replied. She seemed the most receptive to the idea of combining our families. We arranged to meet Megan for lunch at a neutral location, a small cafe halfway between our apartment and her office. She was already there when we arrived, looking uncharacteristically disheveled for someone who prided herself on always maintaining a perfect appearance. "Thanks for coming," she said as we sat down. She took a deep breath. "I want to apologize to you, Elena, not just for this reunion mess, but for not being the sister-in-law you deserved. The sincerity in—" Her voice caught me off guard. In 3 years, I'd never heard Megan Reynolds Wilson apologize for anything. "What brought this on?" Tom asked, clearly as surprised as I was. Megan sighed. "After you left on Saturday, I couldn't stop thinking about everything you said, about inclusion and family. And I realized that I've been complicit in Mom and Dad's elitism." She seemed to struggle with the word. "I never directly excluded you, Elena, but I never stood up for you either. And I should have." "Why now?" I asked, still skeptical. "Is it just because my family now owns Cedar Pines?" She shook her head. "It's because this whole situation made me see my parents clearly for the first time. The way they handled this, lying to us about their financial problems, excluding you from the reunion, being willing to sell our family legacy without even discussing it with us. It's made me question a lot of things." "Like what?" Tom prompted. "Like whether the values they raised us with are really the ones I want to pass on to my kids." She looked at me directly. "I don't want my children to think that someone's worth is determined by their last name, or where they went to school, or what neighborhood they grew up in. But that's exactly what I've been modeling by going along with Mom and Dad's behavior." I studied her face carefully, looking for any signs of deception. All I found was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "I appreciate you saying that, Megan," I said finally. "But words are easy. Your parents have spent 3 years showing me exactly where I stand with them." "I know," she replied, her voice quiet. "And I can't undo that. I can only try to do better going forward." She hesitated, then added, "Which brings me to the reason I wanted to meet. James and I have been talking. We want to be part of whatever reunions happen at Cedar Pines in the future, with both families." Tom's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously? What about Mom and Dad?" Megan sighed. That's their choice to make. But we've made ours. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. Papers signed. Cedar Pines is officially ours. I showed the message to Tom, then to Megan. She nodded, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. So it's done, she said. It feels strange. That place has been ours my whole life. It still can be, I offered, just in a different way. What are you planning to do with it? She asked. Will you renovate? Tom and I exchanged glances. We'd discussed this with my parents but hadn't settled on specifics. Some updates, probably, Tom answered. The plumbing is ancient, and the kitchen could use modernizing. But the character of the place, that's what makes it special. We want to preserve that. I nodded. My parents suggested we spend some time there first, before making any major changes, get a feel for the space. When will you go? Megan asked. This weekend, I replied. My parents want us all to go together, a kind of ceremonial first visit as the new owners. Megan was quiet for a moment, then asked hesitantly, would it be completely inappropriate if James and I joined you? Not for the whole weekend, maybe just for dinner one night? The request took me by surprise. I looked at Tom, who seemed equally startled. Are you sure that's what you want? He asked his sister. It might be. Awkward. She smiled faintly. More awkward than this lunch? I doubt it. Her expression grew serious. Look, I meant what I said about doing better. This seems like a good place to start. After discussing it with my parents that evening, we extended the invitation to Megan and James for Saturday dinner at Cedar Pines. To my amazement, they both accepted. What about your parents? My mother asked Tom as we finalized plans. Should we invite them too? Tom shook his head. They're not ready. Megan told me Dad's pride is still too wounded and Mom... He trailed off. Mom is being Mom. My... Mother nodded, understanding. Some wounds need time to heal before the bandage comes off. My father was less diplomatic. They need to swallow their pride, but that is a dish that goes down very slowly for some people. As we packed for our first weekend at Cedar Pines as its new owners, I found myself experiencing a strange mix of emotions. There was triumph, yes, a vindicating sense that justice had been served. But there was also nervousness. What if owning the cottage didn't feel the way I'd imagined? What if Megan and James's apparent change of heart was just for show? You're overthinking, Tom said Friday morning as he caught me staring at my half-packed suitcase. I can practically hear the gears turning in your head. I smiled weakly. Is it that obvious? He sat beside me on the bed. Only to someone who knows you as well as I do. He took my hand. What's really bothering you? I sighed. What if this doesn't fix anything? What if all we've done is pour gasoline on the fire? Then we'll deal with it, he said simply. Together. His confidence steadied me, as it always did. By that afternoon, we were on the road to Pine Ridge, following behind my parents' car. My brother Carlos had brought his girlfriend Maria, making it a true family affair. The moment we pulled into the driveway of Cedar Pines, everything felt different. This wasn't a visit to the Reynolds vacation home anymore. This was arriving at a place that belonged, in part, to me. My father got out first, standing tall as he looked up at the cedar-shingled structure. He'd worked all his life to provide for his family, starting with nothing but determination and the support of my mother. Now here he was, holding the keys to a lakefront property that represented everything he'd achieved. What do you think, Papa? I asked, coming to stand beside. He put his arm around me. I think this place has been waiting for some Martinez spirit, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We walked through the house together, taking in its familiar yet different atmosphere. The furniture was still there. The sale had included most of the furnishings, but already my mother was making plans. These curtains must go, she declared in the main living room. And we need more color. Some pillows, perhaps, in turquoise and orange. My father laughed. Slow down, Sophia. We've owned the place for less than a day. And that is one day too long for these sad beige drapes, she retorted, making us all chuckle. As we settled in, claiming bedrooms and unpacking groceries, I watched Tom carefully. This had been his family's sanctuary for generations. Now he was here as a guest of my family, in a way. But if he felt uncomfortable, he didn't show it. Instead, he moved through the space with the same ease he always had, pointing out quirks of the old house to my brother and sharing stories of summers spent here. The third step on the back porch always creaks, he told Carlos as they brought in coolers. And that window in the upstairs bathroom sticks when it's humid. By evening, the cottage felt alive in a way I'd never experienced during Reynolds' family gatherings. My mother had taken over the kitchen, filling it with the scents of her cooking. My father and brother were setting up a bonfire down by the lake. Music played from someone's portable speaker, not the classical recordings Diane preferred, but lively Latin rhythms that made the old floorboards vibrate. "Your family belongs here," Tom said quietly, coming to stand beside me as I watched. From the porch. I've never seen Cedar Pines feel so happy. I leaned into him. "Our family," I corrected. "And it's just the beginning." Saturday brought perfect late summer weather, sunshine with a hint of autumn crispness in the air. We spent the day exploring the property, swimming in the still warm lake waters, and preparing for dinner with Megan and James. My mother insisted on cooking an elaborate feast, combining traditional Mexican dishes with some Reynolds family favorites Tom remembered. "We will show them what family means," she said as she rolled out masa for tamales. "Not with words, but with food and open hearts." By 6 o'clock, everything was ready. The long dining table had been moved out to the deck overlooking the lake, set with a colorful tablecloth and candles my mother had brought. The food waited in covered dishes, filling the air with mouth-watering aromas. My father had opened several bottles of wine to breathe. At exactly 6:30, we heard cars on the gravel driveway. Tom and I went to greet our guests. Megan arrived first, her husband David and their 2 children in tow. She looked nervous but determined, clutching a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. "I hope it's okay that I brought the kids," she said. "They've been asking about the cottage non-stop since they heard it was sold." "Of course it's okay," I assured her, accepting the flowers with genuine appreciation. This place is meant for families. James and Margot arrived minutes later, both looking apprehensive. James had the stiff posture I recognized from formal Reynolds gatherings, the one that signaled discomfort masked as dignity. "Thank you for having us," he said formally, handing Tom a gift bag. "It's strange to be a guest here." "Strange for us too," Tom admitted. "But good strange, I think." The initial introductions were awkward. My boisterous, affectionate family contrasted sharply with the more reserved Reynolds siblings. But as we moved to the table and my father poured wine for everyone, the atmosphere gradually relaxed. "A toast," my father said, raising his glass, "to new beginnings and enlarged families." "And to Cedar Pines," Tom added. "May it be filled with more love and laughter than ever before." We all clinked glasses, and I noticed Megan's eyes were suspiciously bright. Dinner progressed with increasing warmth. My mother's food worked its usual magic, breaking down barriers as everyone exclaimed over the flavors. Megan's children, initially shy, were won over by Carlos's silly jokes and my father's stories. Even James began to unwind after his second glass of wine. "I have to ask," he said during a lull in the conversation, "what made you decide to buy this place? Was it really just to teach my parents a lesson?" My father set down his fork. "No," he said firmly. "We bought it because it is a good investment, yes. But more importantly, we bought it because Elena is our daughter, and Tom is our son-in-law." "What hurts them?" hurts us. So it was revenge, James pressed. No, my mother interjected. It was protection. When someone tries to exclude your child, you show them that your child cannot be excluded. She looked directly at Megan and James. One day, when your children face rejection, you will understand. Megan nodded slowly. I think I'm beginning to. After dinner, we moved down to the fire pit my father and brother had prepared. The night was cool enough to make the fire welcome, and as we gathered around it with dessert and coffee, the conversation flowed more naturally. Do you remember the summer we built this fire pit? James asked Tom. Dad insisted we place each stone exactly right. Tom laughed. And then you dropped that huge rock on your foot and cursed so loudly Mom heard you. From the house. 3 weeks of extra chores, James recalled, grinning. Worth it, though. As they shared memories, I watched Megan's children playing at the lake's edge with Carlos and Maria. They'd known each other for less than 4 hours, but already they were building sand castles together, squealing with delight when small waves threatened their creations. Children show us how it's done, my mother murmured, following my gaze. No complicated history, no wounded pride, just joy in the moment. When it was time for our guests to leave, the goodbyes were genuinely warm. Megan hugged me, something she'd never done before. Thank you for tonight, she said, for showing more grace than we deserved. This is just the beginning, I told her. There will be many more dinners. I'd like that, she replied, and I believed her. After they'd gone, we cleared the table and tidied up, all of us pleasantly tired from the day's activities. As Tom and I prepared for bed in what had once been his room during family gatherings, he seemed deep in thought. Penny for your thoughts? I prompted, sitting beside him on the edge of the bed. I was just thinking about how different tonight felt from every other gathering here, he said. There was always so much. Tension in Reynolds' family events. Everything had to be perfect. Everyone had to behave just so. He shook his head. Tonight was messy and loud and real. Is that a good thing? I asked. He pulled me close. It's the best thing. I think Cedar Pines has been waiting for this kind of life for a long time. The next morning, as we were enjoying a late breakfast, on the deck Tom's phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. It's my mom, he said. She wants to meet, just the two of us. I felt a flutter of anxiety. Are you going to? He looked at me. Do you think I should? Part of me wanted to say no. Diane had shown her true colors too many times for me to trust her sudden desire for reconciliation. But I also knew Tom needed resolution with his mother, one way or another. I think you should hear what she has to say, I said carefully. But don't go expecting a miracle. He arranged to meet her at a cafe in Pine Ridge that afternoon. While he was gone, my family and I continued exploring the property, my father making notes about necessary repairs, my mother planning renovations, and Carlos testing the ancient rowboat we'd found in the boathouse. I tried to focus on these activities, but my mind kept returning to Tom's meeting with Diane. What did she want? Was this a genuine olive branch, or just another manipulation? When Tom finally returned 3 hours later, his expression was unreadable. How did it go? I asked as he found me sitting on the dock. He sat beside me, dangling his feet above the water as I was doing. About as well as could be expected, I guess. What does that mean? He sighed. She's hurt, angry, humiliated. But also, I think she's starting to understand that she can't control everything anymore. He looked out across the lake. She asked if they could come to the next reunion. The request took me by surprise. What did you say? I told her they could, on one condition. Let me guess, that they'd treat me with respect? He nodded. More specifically, I said they need to formally apologize to you, in person. Not just for the reunion, but for the past 3 years of making you feel like an outsider. I let that sink in. The idea of Richard and Diane Reynolds apologizing to me seemed almost impossible to imagine. And she agreed? Not exactly, Tom admitted. She said she'd think about it. But the fact that she didn't outright refuse? That's something. What about your dad? I asked. She says he's still too proud to even discuss it. But she seemed tired, Elena. Tired of fighting. Tired of keeping up appearances. I think losing the cottage has shaken them both more than they expected. I leaned my head on his shoulder. So what happens now? We wait, he said simply. The ball's in their court. In the meantime, we make this place ours. Yours, mine, your family's. We create new memories. When Sunday evening came and it was time to head back to Chicago, I felt a strange reluctance to leave. In just 2 days, Cedar Pines had begun to feel like ours in a way I hadn't anticipated. We'd all agreed to return soon, maybe in October, when the fall colors would transform the lakeside landscape. As we locked up and loaded our cars, my father paused for a moment, looking back at the house. You know, he said thoughtfully, I think this place needed us as much as we needed it. It was true. The cottage had always been beautiful, but under the Reynolds' care, it had felt like a museum, pristine, untouchable, preserved in amber. This weekend, it had come alive with laughter, music, and the controlled chaos of real family life. Back in Chicago, life resumed its normal rhythm. Tom returned to his software engineering job, I to my marketing firm. But something had shifted between us. There was a new confidence in our relationship, a sense that we'd faced one of the biggest challenges a marriage could face and emerged stronger. 2 weeks after our weekend at Cedar Pines, I received an unexpected email from Megan. Attached were several old photo albums she'd digitized, images of Cedar Pines through the decades, from its purchase by Tom's grandparents to recent years. I thought you might want these for the cottage, she wrote. They're part of its history, after all. The gesture touched me deeply. It was an acknowledgement that the past wasn't being erased, just expanded to include a new chapter. September faded into October, and we made plans for another weekend at the cottage. This time, my mother had ordered new curtains and throw pillows, determined to bring more color into the space. My father had arranged for a local handyman to fix some of the more pressing maintenance issues. 3 days before we were set to leave, Tom received a text from his father. It was brief and typically Richard in its directness. Your mother and I would like to talk. When would be convenient? Tom showed me the message, his eyebrows raised. What do you think? I think it's about time, I replied, though I couldn't quiet the anxious flutter in my stomach. We arranged to meet Richard and Diane at a neutral location, a restaurant in downtown Chicago that neither family frequented regularly. Tom insisted that I be present for the conversation, and to my surprise, Richard agreed without protest when Tom specified this condition. The evening of the meeting, I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that made me feel confident, yet non-confrontational. A navy blue dress that my mother had given me for my birthday, simple gold jewelry, and comfortable heels that wouldn't leave me shifting uncomfortably during what promised to be a tense conversation. You look beautiful, Tom said as we prepared to leave, and powerful. I smiled at his reflection in the mirror. I need all the power I can get tonight. Remember, he said, wrapping his arms around me from behind, we've already won. Whatever happens tonight doesn't change that. He was right, of course. Cedar Pines was ours now. Megan and James had already shown their willingness to move forward. Whatever Richard and Diane had to say, the foundation of our new reality was already secure. The restaurant was elegant without being stuffy, well lit with comfortable seating, and enough space between tables to ensure privacy. We arrived a few minutes early and were seated at a corner table, partially secluded by a decorative screen of bamboo plants. Wine? Tom asked, scanning the menu. Definitely, I replied. Something strong. He smiled. That bad, huh? I'm just trying to be realistic about how this might go. The waiter had just poured our first glasses when Richard and Diane appeared, guided by the maitre d'. Diane was impeccably dressed as always, her silver hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. Richard looked thinner than I remembered, his once commanding presence diminished somehow. They approached our table with measured steps, neither rushing forward nor dragging their feet. Tom stood to greet them, and after a moment's hesitation, I did the same. The initial exchange of pleasantries was awkward, handshakes instead of hugs, stiff smiles that didn't reach eyes, polite inquiries about the journey downtown that no one really cared about. Once they were seated and had ordered their own drinks, an uncomfortable silence fell. Tom looked at me, then at his parents, clearly waiting for them to begin. Richard cleared his throat. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Of course, Tom replied neutrally. Another silence stretched between us. The waiter returned with Richard and Diane's drinks, giving us a momentary distraction. Finally, Diane spoke. This isn't easy for us, she said, her voice tight with control. I imagine not, I replied, surprising myself with my directness. Her eyes flickered to mine, then away. No, I suppose you would understand that. Richard took a sip of his scotch, then set it down with deliberate care. We've been doing a lot of thinking over the past month, about the cottage, about the reunion, about many things. And, Tom prompted when his father paused. Richard exchanged glances with Diane, who gave him a slight nod. He continued. We behaved poorly. That's the simplest way to put it. We were wrong to exclude Elena from the reunion, and we were wrong not to be honest about the cottage. The admission hung in the air between us. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Richard Reynolds, it was unprecedented. Why? Tom asked. I still don't understand why you thought excluding. My wife was acceptable regardless of your financial situation. Diane fidgeted with her napkin, smoothing non-existent wrinkles. We were embarrassed, she finally said. The financial problems. Richard's firm. It was all falling apart, and we couldn't face telling everyone. We thought, if we had one, last perfect reunion, we could at least preserve that memory. And Elena wasn't part of that perfect picture? Tom's voice had an edge to it. Diane flinched. It wasn't about Elena specifically. It was about maintaining the illusion that nothing had changed. Having someone who wasn't raised with our traditions. Someone who might notice things weren't quite right. So it was because I'm observant? I cut in. Or because I'm Hispanic? Or middle class? Which part of me didn't fit your perfect reunion? Richard surprised me by answering directly. All of it, he said bluntly. And that's our failing, not yours. The honesty was startling. I'd expected deflection, not admission. We've never been good at change, he continued. Our whole lives have been built on certain expectations, certain ways of doing things. When those foundations started crumbling, he shook his head. We made bad decisions, hurtful decisions. Like lying to your own children about selling their inheritance? Tom's voice was quiet but firm. Yes, Richard acknowledged. Like that. The waiter returned to take our dinner orders. The interruption gave me time to absorb what was happening. Richard and Diane Reynolds, the people who had made me feel inferior for 3 years, were actually admitting their mistakes. Not with flowery apologies or dramatic self-flagellation, but with simple, direct acknowledgments. When we'd ordered and the waiter had departed, Diane reached across the table toward me, stopping just short of touching my hand. Elena, she said, and I realized her voice was trembling slightly. What we did was unforgivable. Excluding you from the reunion, treating you as less than family. These past years, we can't undo any of it. But we want you to know that we regret it deeply. I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd come to expect. But all I saw was exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. "Why now?" I asked. "Because we own the cottage? Because Megan and James have chosen sides? Or has something actually changed?" Richard answered. "Losing the cottage was illuminating. It made us confront realities we'd been avoiding. Not just financial ones, but personal ones too." He looked at Tom. "We've always been proud of you, son. Your success, your independence. But we never really understood your choices, including your choice of wife." I tensed, waiting for the backhanded compliment that would inevitably follow. But Richard surprised me again. "We didn't understand because we didn't try to understand. We measured everything, and everyone, against our narrow definition of what was suitable. And in doing so, we missed seeing what was right in front of us. That Elena has brought more joy and authenticity into your life than we ever managed to." Diane nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Megan told us about the dinner at Cedar Pines, about how different it felt, warmer, more alive." She swallowed hard. "She said her children can't stop talking about Elena's family, about how much fun they had. That's never happened after our reunions." Our food arrived, creating another pause in the conversation. I was grateful for the interruption, needing a moment to process what I was hearing. Was this truly happening? Were Richard and Diane Reynolds actually seeing me, seeing us, clearly for the first time? "What exactly are you hoping for here?" Tom asked once the waiter had left. "What do you want from us?" Diane looked at Richard, who nodded encouragingly. She turned back to us. "We want to be part of your lives, both of your lives. Properly, this time." She took a deep breath. "And yes, we'd like to be included in future gatherings at Cedar Pines, if you'll have us. But we understand that has to be earned." "It does," I said firmly. "Trust isn't rebuilt overnight." "We know," Richard replied. "We're prepared to take whatever steps are necessary to make amends." Dinner progressed with less tension than I'd expected. We didn't magically become a perfect, harmonious family, but there was a new openness in our conversation. Richard spoke about his firm's collapse with a humility I'd never witnessed from him before. Diane asked genuine questions about my work, my family, my perspective on things. By dessert, we'd reached a tentative understanding. Richard and Diane would be invited to the next gathering at Cedar Pines, Thanksgiving, which my parents had already begun planning. It would be a true blending of families, with all the potential awkwardness and beauty that entailed. As we parted outside the restaurant, Diane hesitated, then stepped forward to embrace me. The hug was stiff and uncertain, but it was a gesture she'd never made before. "Thank you for hearing us out," she whispered. "We don't deserve your graciousness." "No," I agreed as I stepped back. "But that's how family works sometimes. We give each other chances we don't necessarily deserve." In the taxi heading home, Tom was quiet, lost in thought. I slipped my hand into his. "You okay?" He squeezed my fingers. "I think so. It's just—" I never expected them to actually take responsibility like that. "Me neither," I admitted. "Do you think they meant it?" "I do," he said after a moment's consideration. "They're not great actors, either of them. That was real." "So what now?" I asked. "Now we move forward, cautiously, but forward." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. My parents threw themselves into planning the Thanksgiving gathering at Cedar Pines with characteristic enthusiasm. My mother coordinated with Megan and James about accommodations. The siblings and their families would stay at a nearby bed and breakfast, coming to the cottage during the days. Richard and Diane would do the same, an arrangement that gave everyone necessary space while still enabling family time. Tom and I made several weekend trips to the cottage, supervising repairs, and gradually making the space our own. We replaced the ancient plumbing in the main bathroom, updated some of the electrical wiring that had begun to show its age, and repainted several rooms in warmer, more vibrant colors than the Reynolds had preferred. "What do you think of this? For the living room?" I asked Tom one Saturday, showing him a paint sample in a rich terracotta shade. He studied it, then looked around at the currently beige walls. "It's bold," he said, "but I like it. It feels more like you." I smiled. "More like us, I hope." With each change, the cottage felt less like a Reynolds heirloom and more like a Martinez Reynolds home. My mother's colorful curtains now framed the lake views. My father had repaired the old boat dock, adding comfortable seating for sunset watching. We'd hung family photos throughout the house, not just Reynolds memories, but Martinez ones too, and new pictures from our blended gatherings. One evening in early November, as we sat on the newly renovated deck watching the sun set over the lake, Tom put his arm around me. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For turning what could have been the end of something into the beginning of something better." He gestured toward the cottage behind us. This place was dying under my parents' care, becoming a museum of past glories rather than a living home. You and your family brought it back to life. I leaned into him, soaking in his warmth as the evening air grew chilly. We all need renewal sometimes. Places, people, relationships. Nothing stays the same forever. "Speaking of renewal," Tom said, his tone shifting to something more hesitant, "I've been thinking about something." "Hmm? What would you think about renaming the cottage?" I turned to look at him, surprised. "Renaming it? But it's always been Cedar Pines." "Exactly," he said. "It's always been a Reynolds place, but it's not anymore. It's ours together." I thought maybe giving it a new name would symbolize the fresh start. The idea resonated with me more than I expected. "What did you have in mind?" He smiled. "That's where I'm stuck. I want it to represent both of us, both our families." We brainstormed ideas as darkness fell around us, laughing at some of the more ridiculous combinations of our family names. Eventually, we settled on Lake Haven, simple but meaningful, representing what the place had become for all of us. A haven where family bonds could heal and strengthen. The weekend before Thanksgiving, we made one final trip to prepare the cottage for the upcoming celebration. My parents would arrive Tuesday, with the Reynolds and their families joining us Thursday morning. It would be the first time all of us were together in the same place, a thought that still gave me moments of anxiety despite the progress we'd made. As we drove up to the cottage, I noticed something different about the exterior. The old wooden sign that had proclaimed Cedar Pines for decades was missing from its post by the driveway. "Did you take down the sign last time?" I asked Tom as we unloaded the car. He shook his head, looking equally puzzled. "No. Maybe it fell down in that windstorm last week." We investigated but found no sign of the old marker. Instead, we discovered fresh dirt around the signpost, as if someone had been digging there recently. "Strange," Tom murmured. "I'll check with the handyman. Maybe he removed it for some reason." We put the mystery aside and focused on getting the cottage ready, cleaning, stocking the pantry and refrigerator, preparing guest rooms, and setting up extra tables for the Thanksgiving feast. By Sunday evening, everything was in order. As we made one final inspection of the exterior before leaving, a pickup truck turned into the driveway. It was Eduardo, the local handyman who had been helping with renovations. "Ah, good. You are still here," he called as he parked. "I finished it sooner than I expected." "Finished what?" I asked, approaching the truck. Eduardo grinned and lowered the tailgate, revealing a beautifully crafted wooden sign. The wood was polished cedar, the lettering hand-carved and painted, in a deep, rich blue. Lake Haven. "But how?" I began, then stopped as understanding dawned. I turned to Tom. You did this. He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. I called Eduardo last week after we decided on the name. I wanted it to be a surprise. Eduardo handed the sign to Tom. Where do you want it? We walked together to the signpost by the driveway. Tom hesitated, then offered the sign to me. Would you like to do the honors? Tears pricked my eyes as I accepted it, feeling the solid weight of the wood in my hands. This simple object represented so much. Our journey, our struggles, our triumph, our hope for the future. Together, Tom and I secured the new sign to its post. Eduardo helped us ensure it was level and stable, then bid us goodnight. As his truck disappeared down the driveway, Tom and I stood arm in arm, admiring our handiwork. Lake Haven, I read aloud, the words feeling right on my tongue. I love it. It's a promise, Tom said quietly, that this place will always be a haven for both our families, no matter what. I rested my head on his shoulder. Even for your parents? Even for them, he confirmed, if they're willing to meet us halfway. The drive back to Chicago that evening felt different from previous returns. Usually, I experienced a mixture of reluctance to leave the peaceful lakeside and relief to return to the familiar routines of our apartment. This time, I felt only anticipation, eager for the Thanksgiving gathering that would truly inaugurate Lake Haven as our shared family space. Monday morning, I returned to work to find an envelope on my desk. It had been hand-delivered according to my assistant, who couldn't tell me anything about the messenger except that it was an older woman, very well dressed. Inside was a small, elegantly printed card. The message was brief, but clear. Elena, thank you for your graciousness. We are looking forward to Thanksgiving and a new beginning. Diane. I studied the card, running my fingers over the embossed Reynolds family crest at the top. It was such a Diane gesture, formal, proper, exactly what etiquette would dictate in this situation. But the fact that she had personally delivered it rather than simply mailing it suggested an effort beyond mere obligation. I tucked the card into my purse and turned my attention to work, clearing my schedule for the upcoming holiday break. That evening, I showed the card to Tom. Progress, he said, his expression a mix of surprise and approval. Small steps, but in the right direction. Tuesday morning, we loaded our car for the third time in as many weeks and set off for Lake Haven, this time planning to stay through the weekend. My parents had already arrived the night before, eager to begin preparations for the feast. As we turned onto the now familiar lakeside road, Tom reached over to squeeze my hand. Nervous? He asked. A little, I admitted. But mostly just ready. Whatever happens, we've created something beautiful here. He smiled, lifting my hand to kiss it gently. Yes, we have. The cottage came into view as we rounded the final bend, and I felt a surge of pride at the sight of our new sign, gleaming in the morning sunlight. The cedar shingles of the house glowed warmly against the backdrop of pine trees, and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney. My parents emerged from the front door as we pulled into the driveway, my mother wiping her hands on her apron, my father grinning broadly. Finally! My mother called as we stepped out of the car. I was beginning to think you'd changed your minds about Thanksgiving. I laughed, embracing her. We're right on time, Mama. The turkey doesn't even arrive until tomorrow. There is much more to prepare than just the turkey, she replied, patting my cheek. Come, come. Your father has been making his famous tamales since dawn. Inside, the cottage had been transformed. Fall decorations adorned every surface, gourds and miniature pumpkins, arrangements of autumn leaves, candles in harvest colors. The scents of cinnamon, chili, and masa filled the air. Wow, Tom said, taking it all in. You've been busy. My father clapped him on the shoulder. Your mother-in-law has been like a hurricane. I just try to stay out of her way and follow orders. I heard that, Miguel, my mother called from the kitchen, making us all laugh. We settled in quickly, unpacking our bags and helping with preparations. My brother Carlos and his girlfriend, Maria, were due to arrive that evening, completing our side of the family gathering. The Reynolds would begin arriving Thursday morning. First Megan and her family for breakfast, then James and Margot, and finally Richard and Diane for the main meal at 2 o'clock. That night, with Carlos and Maria settled in and dinner behind us, we gathered in the living room. The fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the newly painted terracotta walls. The warmth and color made the space feel entirely different from the formal, reserved room it had been under Reynolds' ownership. "I propose a toast," my father said, raising his glass of brandy. "To Lake Haven. May it always be a place of joy and togetherness." "To Lake Haven," we echoed, clinking glasses. "You know," Carlos said, leaning back in his chair, "when you first told us about buying this place, I thought it was just Papa making a point." He grinned at our father. "A very expensive point." My father chuckled. "Perhaps it began that way, but now?" He gestured around the room. "Now it is becoming something much more important. A legacy," my mother said softly. "For all of us." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's what my grandparents intended when they bought this place. A legacy for future generations." He looked around at my family, now his family too. I think they'd be happy to see it continuing, even if not exactly as they planned. "Do you really believe that?" I asked, genuinely curious. He considered the question. "I do. They were good people, warm, welcoming, nothing like what my parents turned the place into." He sipped his drink. "This feels more like what Cedar Pines was when I was very young, before everything became so rigid." We talked late into the night, sharing stories and making plans for the following day. By the time we went to bed, my anxiety about the upcoming gathering had softened into anticipation. Whatever happened with the Reynolds, we had already created something beautiful here. Wednesday dawned clear and cold, the lake a sheet of polished silver under the morning light. While my mother and Maria took over the kitchen, starting the epic process of Thanksgiving food preparation, the rest of us focused on final touches around the cottage. Tom and Carlos chopped firewood and stacked it neatly on the porch. My father and I arranged the dining area, setting up 2 tables that would accommodate all 16 people expected for dinner. "Do you think it will work?" I asked my father, as we covered the tables with festive tablecloths. He didn't pretend to misunderstand my question. "Family is never simple, mija, but it is always worth the effort." He straightened a centerpiece of pine cones and autumn leaves. "Your in-laws have taken the first step. That is significant. But will it last? Or is this just temporary humility because they lost the cottage?" He considered this. People change when they must. The loss of the cottage forced them to see things differently. Whether that change lasts? He shrugged. That depends on whether they find value in the new way of seeing. By evening, the cottage was filled with mouth-watering aromas and gleaming with cleanliness. Every bed had been made with fresh linens, guest towels arranged in the bathrooms, extra seating positioned strategically throughout the common areas. We'd even set up a children's table on the enclosed portion of the porch, complete with Thanksgiving crafts to keep younger guests entertained. We enjoyed a simple dinner together, saving our appetites for the next day's feast. Afterward, we played board games by the fire, the conversation flowing easily among us. Watching Tom laugh with my brother, seeing my parents embrace him as truly their son, I felt a profound gratitude wash over me. "Thank you," I said suddenly, making everyone look up from the game. "For what, sweetheart?" Tom asked. "For this," I gestured around the room. "For standing by me. For making this place ours." My mother reached over to pat my hand. Family stands together, Elena. Always. The words hung in the air, a gentle reminder of what tomorrow was really about. Not just a meal or a holiday, but an attempt to redefine what family meant for all of us. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of perfect late autumn weather that seems designed for Thanksgiving. Crisp, sunny, with just enough chill to make the warmth inside feel extra special. I woke early, before the sun had fully risen, and slipped downstairs to make coffee. To my surprise, I found Diane sitting at the kitchen table. I froze in the doorway, momentarily disoriented. "Diane? I thought you weren't coming until afternoon." She stood quickly, smoothing her slacks with nervous hands. "Elena, good morning. I hope it's all right. We arrived last night and stayed at the Pine Ridge Inn. I wanted to come early to help. Your mother said it would be fine." I glanced around the kitchen, noticing now the various food preparations already in progress. A pie cooled on the counter. Dough was rising in a covered bowl. "My mother invited you to cook with her?" I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. Diane smiled faintly. "She called me last week, said if we were truly going to be family, we should start by cooking together." She gestured to the pie. "That's my grandmother's recipe. Pumpkin with a twist. She always added a touch of orange zest." I moved to the coffee maker, needing something to do while I processed this unexpected development. "Where's Richard?" "Still at the inn. He'll come with James and Megan later." She hesitated. "I wanted some time here first, to feel comfortable before everyone arrived." I nodded, understanding better than she knew. How many times had I done the same at Reynolds' family gatherings? Arrived early, tried to find my footing before the full onslaught of family dynamics descended. "Coffee?" I offered, holding up the pot. "Please." I poured 2 cups and sat across from her at the table. For a moment, we sipped in silence. "Where's my mother now?" I finally asked. "She went to wake your father. Something about needing him to pick up extra ice." Diane set down her cup carefully. "Elena, I want to say something while it's just us." I tensed slightly but nodded, for her to continue. "I have been." She paused, searching for words. "Incredibly wrong. About you, about what family means, about so many things." She met my eyes directly. "The card I sent, it wasn't enough. I need you to know that I truly regret how I've treated you." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. This wasn't the carefully composed Diane I knew. This was someone more vulnerable, more real. "What changed?" I asked quietly. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me. "Everything. Losing the cottage was a shock, of course, but seeing how your family handled it, with dignity and generosity, even after how we'd treated you." She shook her head. "It made me question a lifetime of assumptions. That couldn't have been easy." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't. Richard struggled even more than I did. His entire identity was wrapped up in a certain image of success, of control. Losing the cottage, admitting financial failure, it shattered something in him. I thought of my father-in-law, always so commanding, so certain of his place in the world. How is he doing now? Better, I think. Different." She smiled slightly. "Humbler, certainly. We've had to downsize significantly. Sold the house in Lake Forest, moved to a condo in the city. It's been an education." We talked until the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the kitchen. Diane shared details of their financial collapse that she'd never revealed before. How Richard's firm had over-leveraged itself. How they'd hidden the extent of their troubles from everyone, including their children. How the shame of failure had driven them to increasingly desperate measures to maintain appearances. "The saddest part," she said, "is that in trying to preserve what we thought mattered, status, tradition, appearances, We nearly destroyed what actually matters. Family. Connection. My mother found us still talking when she returned from waking my father. She paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. Her daughter and Diane Reynolds, heads bent together in earnest conversation over coffee cups. "Buenos dias," she said, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "I see you two have found each other." The morning progressed with surprising ease. My mother and Diane worked side by side in the kitchen, their different cooking styles somehow complementing each other. Tom came downstairs and did a visible double take at seeing his mother in an apron, kneading dough beside my mother, but he recovered quickly. "Mom," he said, kissing her cheek, "you're early." "Your mother-in-law is a very persuasive woman," Diane replied, smiling at Sophia. "She convinced me that Thanksgiving preparation is a family affair." By 10 o'clock, Megan and her family arrived, her children immediately racing through the house to explore. James and Margot followed shortly after, bringing several bottles of wine and a casserole. Richard was the last to appear, looking distinctly uncomfortable as he stood on the porch with a bouquet of flowers. "These are for you," he said stiffly, handing them to me. "Thank you for including us today." I accepted the flowers, recognizing the gesture for what it was, a proud man's attempt at humility. "Thank you for coming, Richard. Please come in." The house quickly filled with the chaos of a large family gathering. Children running and laughing, multiple conversations happening simultaneously. The kitchen a hive of activity as final dishes were prepared. I moved through it all in a state of bemused wonder, watching the two families interact. Carlos and James discovered a shared interest in fishing and were deep in conversation about lake conditions. My father and Richard, after an initially awkward exchange, found common ground, discussing property values in the area. Megan helped Maria set the children's table, while Margot assisted my mother with the final gravy preparation. Tom caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "You okay?" I nodded, smiling. I was more than okay. I was witnessing something I had once thought impossible, the genuine merging of our families. At 2 o'clock, we gathered around the expanded dining table. Dishes from both family traditions covered every available surface. My mother's tamales alongside Diane's orange zest. Pumpkin pie. My father's spicy cranberry salsa next to Richard's traditional oyster stuffing. My father stood at the head of the table, raising his glass. "Before we eat, I would like to say a few words." He looked around at the assembled faces. "Today is about gratitude. I am grateful for this beautiful place that has brought us all together. I am grateful for new family members." He nodded toward the Reynolds. "And I am most grateful for second chances." Richard cleared his throat. "If I may," he said, rising from his seat. He looked uncharacteristically uncertain. "I would also like to express my gratitude to the Martinez family for their extraordinary generosity of spirit, and to my son and daughter-in-law for teaching this old man that family is not defined by blood or background, but by love and acceptance." He lifted his glass. "To family, all of it." "To family," we echoed, glasses clinking around the table. As we ate, the conversation flowed naturally. There were still moments of awkwardness, still instances where cultural differences or old habits created brief tensions. But there was also laughter, genuine interest, and the beginning of new connections. After dinner, while the children played a noisy game of hide-and-seek throughout the house, the adults gathered on the deck. Despite the November chill, braziers had been lit, providing enough warmth to make the lakeside setting comfortable. Richard approached me as I stood by the railing, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. "It's quite a view," he said, coming to stand beside me. "Yes," I agreed. "It never gets old." He was quiet for a moment. "You've done remarkable things with the place. It feels alive again. Thank you. That means a lot, especially coming from you. He turned to face me directly. Elena, I owe you an apology. A real one, not the diplomatic version I gave at dinner. His expression was earnest, stripped of its usual reserve. I judged you unfairly from the moment we met. I saw only what I wanted to see, what fit my narrow world view. I missed seeing the remarkable woman my son was fortunate enough to marry. The sincerity in his voice moved me. Thank you, Richard. That can't have been easy to say. No, he agreed with a small smile. But necessary things rarely are. We stood in companionable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Behind us, I could hear the mingled voices of both families, my mother's distinctive laugh, Tom's deep chuckle, the children's excited shouts as they discovered new hiding places. Will you continue the reunions? Richard asked eventually. The annual gatherings? Yes, I said without hesitation, but with some changes. More inclusive, less formal. A celebration of what brings us together rather than a performance of tradition for tradition's sake. He nodded. I think that's wise. He glanced back at the house. Diane and I. We'd like to be part of that if you'll have us. Your family, I said simply. That's what tonight is all about. Later. That evening, after the Reynolds had departed and the house had quieted, Tom and I walked down to the shore. The night was clear, stars reflecting on the still surface of the lake like scattered diamonds. So, Tom said, wrapping his arm around me, what's the verdict? Success or disaster? I leaned into his warmth. Definitely success. Not perfect, but real. Real is better than perfect, he agreed. Did my dad actually apologize to you? I saw you two talking on the deck. He did, and I believe he meant it. Tom shook his head in wonder. I never thought I'd see the day. Richard Reynolds, humbled. People can change, I said, thinking of the transformation I'd witnessed in both his parents. When they're ready, Törstjärn. We walked along the shore in comfortable silence, the gentle lapping of water against the dock providing a soothing rhythm. You know what I keep thinking about? Tom said eventually. What's that? How differently things might have turned out if we'd just accepted their exclusion. If we'd let them have their family-only reunion without challenging it. I considered this. They might still have the cottage. We wouldn't be here right now. Exactly. Something good came from standing up for what matters. He stopped walking, turning to face me. You taught me that, Elena, to fight for what's important instead of just going along to keep the peace. And you taught me that family can be redefined, I replied, that it's not fixed or limited by blood or background. He kissed me gently. We make a good team. The best, I agreed. Back at the cottage, we found my parents sitting by the fire, talking quietly over cups of spiced cider. My father looked up as we entered, his expression contented. Ah, there you are, he said, gesturing for us to join them. We were just discussing Christmas. Christmas? Tom asked, settling into an armchair while I curled up on its arm. That's still a month away. My mother smiled mischievously. Time moves quickly, mijo, and there are decisions to make. What kind of decisions? I asked, accepting the cup of cider my father offered me. Whether to host Christmas here for one, my father replied. It would be the first Christmas at Lake Haven. The idea immediately appealed to me. Christmas at the lake would be magical, the cottage draped in lights, perhaps snow blanketing the shore, a towering tree in the corner where the Reynolds' formal portrait had once hung. I love that idea, I said, looking at Tom. What do you think? He nodded slowly. It could be wonderful. Different from both our family traditions, but maybe that's good. Something new that belongs to all of us. Exactly, my mother said. clearly pleased with our reaction. New traditions for our combined family. As we discussed possibilities, which bedrooms would accommodate which guests, whether to have a Christmas Eve dinner or Christmas Day lunch, what decorations would work best, I felt a deep sense of rightness settle over me. This was what we had fought for, what we had hoped to create, a true blending of families, a space where everyone belonged. The weeks following Thanksgiving passed in a flurry of activity. Tom and I divided our time between our Chicago apartment and Lake Haven, where preparations for Christmas were well underway. My mother had taken charge of decorating, enlisting help from both Megan and Diane, who had grown increasingly comfortable in each other's company. The transformation of the cottage was magical. Twinkling lights outlined every window and draped across the eaves. Inside, garlands of pine and holly adorned the staircase and fireplace mantel. The centerpiece was a magnificent 12-foot pine, tree that my father and Carlos had selected from a local tree farm, now resplendent with ornaments contributed by both families. Diane had surprised everyone by arriving one weekend with boxes of vintage glass ornaments that had been stored in their attic, treasures from the early days of cedar pines that she thought should remain with the cottage. "These belong here," she'd said simply, handing the carefully packaged ornaments to my mother. Part of the cottage's history. The gesture had touched all of us, representing as it did Diane's acceptance of the new reality. Not just grudging acknowledgement, but active participation in creating something new from the foundations of the past. Richard's adjustment had been slower, more measured, but no less significant. He'd taken to joining my father for early morning fishing expeditions when he visited, the two men finding comfortable silence together on the dock as dawn broke over the lake. They rarely caught anything worth keeping, but that wasn't the point. The ritual itself was healing. Tom noticed it too. "I've never seen my father so calm," he remarked one evening in mid-December as we prepared for bed. "It's like he's finally stopped performing and started living." "Losing everything can do that," I replied. "Strip away the unnecessary until you see what truly matters." He nodded thoughtfully. "I just hope it lasts." "I think it will," I said. "The humility doesn't come naturally to him, but the connection does. He's discovering what family actually means, maybe for the first time." As Christmas approached, the weather cooperated beautifully with our vision of a winter wonderland. A series of gentle snowfalls blanketed the landscape, transforming Lake Haven into a picture-perfect holiday setting. The frozen lake sparkled. In the sunshine, pine trees drooped gracefully under their white burdens, and our new sign stood out boldly against the snow-covered ground. 2 days before Christmas, Tom and I made the final drive up from Chicago, our car packed with presents, food, and last-minute decorations. We'd decided to stay through New Year's, taking extended time off work to fully enjoy the holiday season at the lake. As we turned onto the familiar driveway, now cleared of snow but bordered by pristine white drifts, I felt a flutter of anticipation. This would be our first major holiday hosting both families, the true test of whether the Thanksgiving success could be sustained and expanded. "Nervous?" Tom asked, reading my expression as he always did. "A little," I admitted. "There's more. Pressure with Christmas somehow. Everyone has such strong traditions and expectations." He reached over to squeeze my hand. "That's exactly why we're doing something completely different. New place, new traditions, fresh start." The cottage looked like something from a fairy tale as we approached, lights twinkling against the early twilight, smoke curling from the chimney, windows glowing with warm welcome. My parents' car was already in the driveway, along with Carlos's SUV. Inside, the scene was equally enchanting. A fire crackled in the hearth, filling the space with warmth and the scent of burning pine. My mother and Maria were in the kitchen, preparing something that smelled divine. Carlos and my father were adjusting the massive tree, which had been slightly tilted to one side. "Finally!" my mother exclaimed when she saw us. "We were beginning to think you'd been caught in the snow." Just traffic, Tom replied, accepting her enthusiastic embrace. The roads are actually pretty clear. We settled in quickly, unpacking our things and joining the preparations. The evening passed in a flurry of activity, hanging the last of the decorations, wrapping final gifts, preparing guest rooms for the arrivals expected the next day. By the time we all collapsed in the living room with mugs of my mother's famous Mexican hot chocolate, Lake Haven felt completely transformed from the formal, somewhat sterile environment it had been under Reynolds' ownership. It's perfect, I sighed, looking around at the twinkling lights, the garlands, the personalized stockings hanging from the mantel, one for each family member, including the Reynolds. Not quite perfect yet, my father said mysteriously. There is one final touch. He disappeared into his bedroom and returned carrying a small box wrapped in silver paper. This is for both of you, he said, handing it to Tom and me. An early Christmas gift. Tom looked at me, eyebrows raised in question. I shrugged, equally puzzled. Open it, my mother urged, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Tom carefully unwrapped the package, revealing a hinged wooden box about the size of his palm. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay an ornate key with an intricate design on its handle. It's beautiful, I said, confused but appreciative. But what does it open? My father smiled. Nothing. It is symbolic, the key to Lake Haven. In our culture, a new home is blessed with a special key, representing protection and welcome. He looked at Tom. I had it made from a piece of the original cedar pine sign. Old wood, new purpose. Tom ran his finger over the key, clearly moved. This means a lot, he said, his voice slightly rough. Thank you. It should hang by the front door, my mother explained. A reminder that this place is a haven for all who enter with love in their hearts. The next morning dawned clear and cold, sunlight sparkling off the snow-covered landscape. We had just finished breakfast when Megan arrived with her family, their car laden with presents and suitcases. We're here for the duration, she announced cheerfully as her children raced past us to see the tree. David has to return to the city for work on the 27th, but the kids and I are staying through New Year's if that's okay. More than okay, I assured her, helping with their bags. We have plenty of room. James and Margot arrived an hour later, followed shortly by Richard and Diane. By noon, Lake Haven was filled with the cheerful chaos of a large family gathering, children playing, adults catching up, everyone exclaiming over the decorations and the magnificent view of the frozen lake. You've created something magical here, Diane said quietly as she helped me prepare lunch in the kitchen. I wouldn't have thought it possible 6 months ago. Not just me, I replied, squeezing her arm gently. All of us together. She nodded, her eyes suspiciously bright. Yes, together. Christmas Eve brought the culmination of our planning, a feast that combined traditions from both families. My mother's pozole and tamales shared the table with Diane's crown roast and Yorkshire pudding. We'd set up a long table in the main living area, with additional seating for the children at a smaller table nearby. Before we began eating, my father stood to offer a toast. 1 year ago, none of us could have imagined this moment, he said, looking around at the assembled faces. Life takes unexpected turns, some painful, some beautiful. But tonight, we celebrate the beauty that can come from change, from opening our hearts, from redefining what family means. Richard stood as well, raising his glass. To Lake Haven, and to the Martinez family, who turned what could have been bitter into sweet. We are grateful to be included in this new chapter. To Lake Haven, we echoed, glasses clinking around the table. The meal was everything we'd hoped for. Delicious. Food, flowing conversation, moments of laughter and warmth. The children, excited about the prospect of Santa's arrival, barely ate, too busy discussing their wish lists and eyeing the presents already piled under the tree. After dinner, we gathered in the living room for the tradition my mother had insisted on maintaining, reading The Night Before Christmas aloud before the children went to bed. To my surprise, it was Richard who volunteered to be the reader. My father always read this to us on Christmas Eve, he explained, settling into the armchair by the fire with the illustrated book. It was my favorite tradition. As his deep voice filled the room with the familiar words, I looked around at our blended family. My parents sitting close together on the sofa, Carlos with his arm around Maria, Megan and David with their children. Sprawled at their feet, James and Margot cuddled in a corner, Diane watching her husband with a soft expression I'd never seen before. Tom caught my eye from across the room and smiled, a smile that held 1,000 unspoken words of love and gratitude. I smiled back, my heart so full it felt like it might burst. When the story concluded and the excited children had finally been herded to bed with promises that Santa wouldn't come until they were asleep, the adults settled in with glasses of wine and eggnog. "I have something I'd like to say," Diane announced unexpectedly, setting down her wine glass. All eyes turned to her, curious. She seemed uncharacteristically nervous, smoothing her slacks with one hand. "I've been doing a lot of thinking over these past months," she began, "about the mistakes Richard and I made, about the things we valued that turned out to be empty." She looked directly at me. "Elena, when we excluded you from the reunion, it wasn't just because of the cottage sale. It was because you represented everything that challenged our narrow worldview, your different background, your strong family bonds that didn't depend on status or tradition." The room was silent, everyone holding their breath as Diane continued. "I was afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid that acknowledging your place in our family meant admitting that our way wasn't the only way, maybe wasn't even the best way. It was easier to exclude you than to question a lifetime of assumptions." Richard reached over to take her hand, supporting her through this difficult confession. "But losing the cottage forced us to confront those assumptions," she continued. "And what we've discovered through this process is that family, real family, is so much richer, so much more beautiful than the careful performance we'd been maintaining." She looked around the room, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Being welcomed here, despite everything, has been the greatest gift, greater than any house or possession could ever be." My throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you for saying that, Diane." "It needed to be said," she replied simply. "Not just for you, but for all of us." The evening continued with a gentler tone after Diane's heartfelt words. We played board games, shared stories of past Christmases, and enjoyed the simple pleasure of being together without the weight of past tensions. When midnight approached, Megan suggested we all walk down to the lake to look at the stars, a new tradition for Lake Haven Christmases. Bundled in coats, scarves, and boots, we made our way down the snowy path to the shore. The night was perfectly clear, stars blazing in a black velvet sky, their light reflecting off the frozen surface of the lake. Our breath formed clouds in the cold air as we stood in reverent silence, absorbing the beauty of the moment. Tom slipped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. "Merry Christmas, Elena," he whispered, his lips brushing my ear. "Merry Christmas," I whispered back, leaning into his warmth. As we stood there surrounded by our families, both of them, now truly one, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. From rejection and hurt to ownership and inclusion, from division to unity, from exclusion to embrace. The text that had started it all, family only this year, had been transformed into something entirely different. Now family meant all of us, together, creating new traditions while honoring the best parts of the old ones. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snowfall, adding another layer of magic to Lake Haven. The children were up at dawn, of course, their excited voices carrying through the cottage as they discovered the filled stockings and new presents under the tree. The adults followed more slowly, gathering with coffee and pastries to watch the gift-opening frenzy. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing Lake Haven filled with torn wrapping paper, excited exclamations, and the happy chaos of Christmas morning. So different from the formal, controlled gift exchanges of Reynolds' Christmases past. Later, as everyone relaxed with their new gifts, Tom took my hand and led me outside to the porch. The morning was crystalline, sunlight turning the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling wonderland. "I have one more gift for you," he said, pulling a small package from his pocket. "Something I wanted to give you privately." I unwrapped it carefully to find a velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a tiny house. "It's beautiful," I said, touching the pendant gently. "Look closer," Tom urged. I examined the pendant and realized it was actually a miniature rendition of Lake Haven, complete with tiny cedar shingles and the distinctive windows overlooking the lake. "Tom, this is amazing," I whispered, genuinely moved. "Where did you find something so perfect?" "I had it custom made," he replied, using photos of the cottage. "I wanted you to always have a piece of this place with you, even when we're back in the city." I turned around so he could fasten the necklace around my neck, the pendant resting perfectly at the hollow of my throat. "I love it, and I love you." He kissed me softly. "This year has been quite a journey." "Worth every step," I said firmly. "Even the painful ones?" I considered this, thinking of the hurt, the confrontations, the difficult conversations that had brought us to this point. Yes, I decided. Even those. They led us here, after all. He smiled, brushing a snowflake from my hair. "They did, indeed." We stood together on the porch, watching the sunlight dance across the frozen lake, the pendant warm against my skin. Lake Haven stretched behind us, filled with the sounds of family, laughter, conversation, children playing, the gentle background noise of belonging. 6 months ago, a text message had told me I wasn't welcome at a family reunion. Now I stood, as co-owner of that very reunion place, surrounded by a family that had expanded to include everyone, even those who had once excluded me. The irony wasn't lost on me. Neither was the lesson. Sometimes rejection leads to something far more valuable than acceptance ever could have. Sometimes being told you don't belong is the first step toward creating a place where everyone truly does. As Tom and I turned to go back inside, I caught sight of our new sign gleaming in the morning sunlight. Lake Haven. A place of safety, of welcome, of unconditional belonging. A place where families could heal, grow, and transform. A place that had become ours not just through legal ownership, but through the harder, more important work of creating genuine connection. "Ready to go back in?" Tom asked, nodding toward the door. I smiled, touching the house pendant at my throat. "Yes, let's join our family." And together, we stepped back into the warmth of Lake Haven, the home that rejection had built, but love had transformed. The next few days passed in a blur of holiday activities. We built snowmen on the lakeshore, went ice skating on a cleared section of the frozen lake, took walks through the snow-covered woods surrounding the property. Evenings were filled with board games, movies, and conversations that stretched late into the night. With each passing day, the boundaries between Martinez and Reynolds blurred further, family ties strengthening into something new and unbreakable. New Year's Eve brought another gathering, smaller than Christmas but no less meaningful. Megan and her children had stayed as planned, and James and Margot returned for the celebration. Richard and Diane joined us for dinner, though they opted to return to the Pine Ridge Inn rather than staying overnight. "Too many stairs for these old bones," Richard joked, though I suspected he and Diane still needed occasional space from the boisterous Martinez style of celebration. We had prepared the deck for midnight, stringing extra lights and setting up outdoor heaters to combat the winter chill. As the hour approached, we bundled up and gathered outside, champagne glasses in hand. "I'd like to propose a toast," my father said as we formed a circle under the starlit sky. "To the year behind us, with all its challenges and surprises, and to the year ahead, full of possibilities. And to second chances," Diane added softly. "May we never take them for granted." "To family," Tom said, raising his glass higher, "in all its beautiful complexity." As we clinked glasses, the first fireworks exploded over the lake, a display put on by residents on the opposite shore. The colors reflected on the ice, creating a double show of light and wonder. In that moment, surrounded by family both old and new, I felt a profound sense of completion. The journey that had begun with exclusion had led to something I could never have imagined, a true blending of lives, traditions, and hearts. When midnight struck and cheers erupted around the circle, Tom pulled me close for our New Year's kiss. "Happy New Year, Mrs. Reynolds Martinez," he whispered against my lips. "Happy New Year," I replied, savoring the rightness of being exactly where I belonged. The first days of January brought departures, Megan and her children returning to their home, Carlos and Maria heading back to Chicago for work. My parents staying for one more week to help close up the cottage for a brief winter hiatus. Before my parents left, we sat together by the fire, discussing plans for Lake Haven's future. "We should open it to extended family too," I suggested. "Cousins, aunts, uncles, anyone who wants to experience this place." My father nodded approvingly. "The more love fills these walls, the stronger they become." "And maybe a summer camp for the children?" my mother added. 2 weeks in July, perhaps, where all the cousins can be together." Tom smiled at their enthusiasm. "I think my grandparents would have loved what this place is becoming. They always wanted it to be full of life and laughter." As we closed up Lake Haven for our own return to Chicago, I took a final walk through each room, appreciating how much had changed in just 6 months. The walls were warmer colors now, family photos, both Reynolds and Martinez, hung in carefully arranged clusters, touches of both cultures evident in every space. In the entry hall, the symbolic key my father had given us hung beside the door, a reminder of the sanctuary this place had become. I touched it gently, a silent promise to honor its meaning in the years to come. Tom found me there, car keys in hand. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. "Almost," I replied. "Just saying goodbye. For now." He wrapped his arms around me from behind, both of us gazing at the key. "It's strange to think how this all started." "With rejection," I murmured. "And ended with something better than acceptance," he finished. "Something completely new." We locked the door behind us, the sign Lake Haven catching the winter sunlight as we drove away. In my purse, I carried a small notebook filled with plans for spring planting, summer gatherings, and fall festivities. A full year of Lake Haven moments waiting to unfold. 3 months later, as the first signs of spring began to appear in Chicago, we received an unexpected invitation. Richard and Diane were hosting a dinner at their new condominium, and they wanted Tom and me to be their first official guests. "Should we go?" I asked Tom, uncertain what to make of this development. "I think we should," he replied after considering it. "They're trying, Elena. That counts for something." The condominium was nothing like their former Lake Forest mansion, smaller, simpler, with views of the city rather than manicured gardens. But as we entered, I was struck by how much warmer it felt than their previous home had ever been. Diane greeted us with genuine warmth, taking my coat herself rather than directing me to a closet or housekeeper as she would have in the past. Richard offered drinks, seeming comfortable in the role of host rather than lord of the manor. "We've been wanting to have you over for weeks," Diane explained as she led us into the living room. "But we wanted everything to be just right." The space was tastefully decorated but with surprisingly personal touches. Family photos, including several from Christmas at Lake Haven, books that looked actually read rather than just displayed, comfortable furniture arranged for conversation rather than impression. "Your place is lovely," I said sincerely. "It feels like a home." Diane smiled, clearly pleased. "That's exactly what we were aiming for. We've learned a lot about what makes a house a home over these past months." During dinner, which Diane proudly announced she had cooked herself, Richard cleared his throat, setting down his fork with deliberate care. "We have some news we wanted to share with you first," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Before we tell Megan and James." Tom tensed slightly beside me. "What kind of news?" Richard and Diane exchanged glances. "Good news," Diane assured us quickly. "At least we hope you'll think so." Richard took a deep breath. "I've been offered a position teaching business ethics at Northwestern, part-time, starting this fall." "Business ethics?" Tom repeated, clearly stunned. His father had always dismissed academia as being for those who couldn't succeed in the real business world. Richard nodded, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "Ironic, I know, given my own failures in that department, but perhaps that makes me uniquely qualified to speak on the subject." That's wonderful," I said, genuinely impressed by this transformation. "Congratulations." "And I've started volunteering at the Art Institute," Diane added. "Just 2 days a week, leading tours for school children. It's been incredibly rewarding." As they shared more details about their new ventures, I was struck by the genuine enthusiasm in their voices. These weren't the calculated moves of people trying to rebuild their social standing. These were the choices of individuals who had fundamentally reevaluated what mattered to them. Later, over dessert, Richard brought up Lake Haven. "We've been thinking about the summer reunion," he said carefully. "And we'd like to contribute somehow, not financially," he added quickly, "but perhaps with planning, organization, whatever, would be helpful." "That would be wonderful," I replied, touched by the offer. "It should be a group effort anyway, everyone contributing what they can." "We thought perhaps a theme this year," Diane suggested. "Something that celebrates both families' heritage, a cultural exchange of sorts." "I love that idea," I said, genuinely excited by the prospect. My mother would be thrilled. As we drove home that evening, Tom was unusually quiet. "What are you thinking?" I asked, watching his profile in the city lights. "I'm thinking about second chances," he replied after a moment. "About how rare and valuable they are." He glanced at me. "My parents are different people now. Or maybe they're finally the people they were meant to be all along, before status and appearance became everything." "People can change," I said, softly, "when the right catalyst comes along." He reached for my hand across the console. "You were that catalyst, Elena. You and your family. You showed them what they were missing by valuing the wrong things." "We all changed," I acknowledged. "That's what family does. Challenges us, shapes us, makes us better versions of ourselves." Spring unfurled across the Michigan lakeshore, bringing Lake Haven back to vibrant life. We visited as often as our work schedules allowed, sometimes alone, sometimes with various family members. My mother planted a garden that combined ornamental, flowers with herbs and vegetables, beautiful and practical, just like her approach to life. My father and Richard worked together on rebuilding the old dock, their different approaches to the task somehow complementing each other. By the time Memorial Day arrived, Lake Haven was ready for its first full summer season under new ownership. The weekend brought both families together again, launching what would become a pattern of shared holidays and ordinary weekends alike. One evening during that weekend, as sunset painted the sky in spectacular colors, I found myself sitting on the new dock with Diane. We had developed an unexpected friendship over the months, one based on genuine appreciation rather than obligation. "I never thanked you properly," she said, as we watched the sun sink below the tree line. "For what?" "For not giving up on us. After how we treated you, you would have been justified in cutting us out completely." She turned to look at me directly. "Instead, you opened your heart and your home to us. You gave us the chance to become better people." I considered her words carefully. "I think perhaps we all needed this place," I said finally, gesturing toward the cottage behind us. "A neutral ground where we could redefine ourselves and our relationships." "Lake Haven," she mused. "It really has become that, hasn't it? A haven for all of us." We sat in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Behind us, voices and laughter drifted from the cottage, Tom and James debating something good-naturedly, my mother and Megan discussing recipes, children giggling as they played a board game under Carlos's supervision. The sounds of family, not Martinez, not Reynolds, but something new and beautiful that encompassed both while transcending either. As summer progressed into fall, and fall gave way to another winter, Lake Haven continued to evolve. Each season brought new traditions, new memories, new connections. The annual reunion expanded to include extended family from both sides, a joyous celebration that bore little resemblance to the formal, exclusive gatherings of Reynolds' past. 1 year after, purchasing Cedar Pines Cottage, my family hosted a special dinner to commemorate the anniversary. Everyone who had been part of that tumultuous journey gathered around the expanded dining table. My parents, Carlos and Maria, Megan and her family, James and Margot, Richard and Diane, and of course, Tom and me. My father stood to offer a toast. "1 year ago, we bought a house," he said, looking around at the assembled faces. "Today, we celebrate a home created not by ownership papers or legal rights, but by love, acceptance, and the courage to begin again." Richard raised his glass in response. "And to the Martinez family, who taught us that true wealth isn't measured in property or prestige, but in the joy of belonging." As glasses clinked around the table, I caught Tom's eye. In that shared glance was a world of understanding, about how far we'd come, about the beauty that can emerge from pain, about the family we had created together. The text that had once excluded me now seemed like a distant memory, replaced by countless messages of inclusion, invitations, and genuine connection. The family that had once deemed me unwelcome had become part of a larger, richer family fabric, woven together by choice rather than obligation. Lake Haven stood as a testament to what happens when rejection is met not with bitterness, but with creative determination. When you don't belong becomes the catalyst for building something where everyone belongs. As dinner gave way to dessert and conversation flowed around the table, I touched the house pendant that still hung around my neck, a constant reminder of our journey. What had begun as the most painful exclusion of my life had led to the most meaningful inclusion I could imagine, a true blending of families, cultures, and hearts. Sometimes the most beautiful havens are built on the foundation of rejection, their walls strengthened by forgiveness, their doors opened wide by love. Lake Haven was living proof of that truth, a place where family only had been transformed into family is everyone who chooses to belong. And in that transformation, we had all found home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.